Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is the application of Gerald H. Miller Jr. For a variance from Section 1909, point capital E, to allow a fence in the front yard. This property is located at 1925 Johnson Road, Plymouth Meeting, PA 19462. It is zoned A residential, and this matter was continued from the board's November 20th, 2023 meeting at the applicant's request, and he is here tonight to proceed.
What's your name?
Joe.
Do you solemnly swear or affirm the testimony you're about to give in this matter is the truth and nothing but the truth?
So you want to explain to the board and the public
Sure.
what it is you'd like to do?
Sure, so I don't know if you're familiar with the property, more or less, my driveway is an extension of Gawain, so I'm on Johnson and Gawain. So for years, the whole front of my property was 30-foot white pines that were slowly deteriorating and falling and growing into the street. So we cleared all those out, so my front yard is, let's say, 90 feet deep to the house. So we just want aesthetic, just put a 4-foot split rail fence. It's not gonna tie into anything. My neighbor does have a 7-foot fence that encircles his whole property, front and back. It won't tie into that. There's gonna be a gap in between. So it's just aesthetics for plantings. You know, there'll be plantings right in front and then some larger ones behind it. And it'll be set, I have a private utility pole in the yard. So it'll be lined up with that, which is just shy of 19 feet back from the street.
How tall is the fence?
It's a 4-foot, so the top of the 3 rails is 4 feet, and then you probably have another 4 inches, up for where the posts are.
See any questions, Mr. Higgins?
No question.
Mr. Daly?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Are your neighbors okay with you doing this?
Yes.
Okay. This wouldn't, because it's a split rail fence, on a non-corner property, I doubt that would cause any visual issues for travelers or.
No, so again, my biggest concern was, folks coming out of my driveway. So it's like I said, it's 19 feet off the street.
Yeah.
So, there's gonna be plenty of sight. And doesn't obstruct anyone coming up from Gawain either.
Okay. And you chose the 18 feet as a setback versus 40 just because it's blind, it would line up with that pole.
Correct, that's right.
More aesthetic than anything else. It's nothing joining your neighbor. Your neighbor, I know, has like a black aluminum.
Correct.
Rail fence.
Yeah, no, it's not gonna tie in at all. There's gonna be a lot of space there, like for me to turn my riding mower around.
Okay, yeah, okay, so it's really gonna be ornamental.
It's just aesthetic. It doesn't tie, it's just a run. It doesn't tie
Yeah,
into
okay.
anything.
Yeah, it's a very nice looking property, and with the trees gone.
Yeah, thank you, thanks.
I have no further questions, thank you.
How high are the plantings going to be? Height?
They'll be below the fence.
Okay, no questions. No questions, thank you.
Yeah, those trees were something.
Yeah, they were something, that's right, they were.
You can see the house now.
I know.
So I understand wanting at least some,
Yeah, to break it up, it's a large front yard. Just want to break it up.
you're set back pretty far, so. And again, your neighbors have no issues.
No issues.
Where it's set back, I don't see it interfering with anything because it's so far set back.
Correct.
Did you say it was going to be set back just shy of 19 feet
Yeah, I think it's.
into your property from Johnson Road?
That's right. 18
Okay.
18 feet 9 inches.
18 feet 9 inches, okay. I couldn't find that, okay. Thank you, yeah.
And
Okay, great.
The way his house is.
Oh, there it is.
It's big, single-family houses, pretty good lots. I don't know how big your lot is, but it's big.
1.3.
So, does anybody from the public have any comments? Mr. Sander?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. If the board is of a mind, it would be a motion to grant the request for variance from Section 1909E to allow a fence in the front yard as described by the applicant, subject to compliance with his testimony this evening and obtaining all required permits and approvals from the township.
Do we have a motion?
I'll make a motion, Mr. Chairman.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Have a vote. Mr. Higgins? In favor. Mr. Daly?
In favor.
Mr. Mr. O'Feely?
In favor.
Mr. Ramondo?
In favor.
Chair votes in favor. Good luck.
Thank you.
1508 Martin Street.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is the application of Brian O'Shea for a variance from section 702C1 to allow a 2-foot side yard setback where 12 feet is required in order to accommodate a proposed addition to an existing single-family residence. Property is located at 1508 Martin Street, Plymouth Meeting, PA 19462, and is located in the C residential development.
Good evening.
Brian O'Shea?
Raise your right hand, please, as you solemnly swear or affirm the testimony that you give in Massachusetts.
Preliminarily, is there anybody else here interested in this application? Okay, seeing none, Mr. O'Shea.
Before you guys don't have to stick around. You can stay if you want. It's a public meeting and you can watch and it's interesting. But, yeah. So, and the next case has got a little more juice to it too after this. Anyway, sorry about that. Want to explain to the board what it is you'd like to do?
Yeah, so my wife and I are looking to add a bedroom, first floor bedroom onto our existing home. We have about 12 feet as you're looking at the front of the property to the right before you hit our property line, and then there's an additional 11 to 12 foot common alley that's township property before my neighbor's property line. We were looking to extend over about 10 feet, pretty close to that property line, and then back 16 feet to make about 160 square foot first floor addition. There would need to be foundation. There'll be crawl space with access to the basement. We started looking at contractors to get the work done, and in talking with our neighbors over the last couple of years, there wouldn't be any protests from the neighbor who's closest to that side or across the street, or the other neighbor on the other side of us either.
You said one-story addition?
One story, correct. Yeah, the idea is to keep the front of the home consistent looking, so match the stucco and everything across, match the pitch of the roof line, match the window style. So as from the front, it looks like a single, of course, a single home. And it would just around the side, we would have just a much reduced side yard.
How wide your side yard on the other side?
So the other side of the property is mostly walkway. It's mostly a concrete walkway, but it is between the left side of the home and that neighbor, that is about 12 feet as well. So it's about even on either side, but there's 12 feet of our property on the right side, and then there's the alleyway, making about 24 altogether between my property and my neighbor's property.
But on the other side of your house, that yard you showed as being pretty narrow on the other side. Not where your addition is, the other side.
So the other side, yeah, there's a concrete sidewalk, and then there's yard. The drawing didn't capture everything, but it is all together. That's about 12 feet on the other side of the property.
Let's see if the board has any questions. Mr. Higgins?
No question.
Mr. Daly?
The shared alley is going to remain, right? Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It won't be encroached on, right?
Correct. No, there'll be between my property line, we'll still have about 2 feet, and then the line, and then the alley.
Okay. Because I know it doesn't really look so much like an alley unless I couldn't see the end of, like, where the termination, if it goes through to.
It doesn't really go anywhere. Yeah, that's the
Okay.
thing. Yeah, it's all grass. Yeah, it's it looks almost like it would be a driveway, but it's all grassed over, and it sort of terminates into some thicket in the back, which is owned by a guy behind me.
Yeah, the Google Maps photo showed it looked like a stand of arbor vitae along the side, but that wasn't there on the Reconnoitance property.
Yeah, it is a mess back there. It is. It's a very like kids kick their soccer balls back there sometimes, and they're just gone.
Okay. So but there were arbor vitae like along the border of the alley and the neighbor's yard. That's not there.
No, it's been clear. There used to be a big oak tree that neighbor took down. That was all wrapped in vines, and yeah, that's all been cleared.
Okay.
So that's here. He's going to put his addition down.
Okay. Those are my questions. Thank you very much.
Mr. O'Feely?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a little confused here. Is it the side with the red shed?
Correct.
Is there a red shed there?
Mhm.
So you have 12 feet, and then how much is the alley? How wide is the alley?
It's about 11.
That's 11? Is the shed on the alley?
The shed is not. The shed's on my neighbor's property.
Okay. It just doesn't look like that much space. I'm not sure. And what do they use the alley for?
Well, it's Township's alley. Nobody uses
I
it.
understand that. Nobody uses it?
No, there's no
Who
drive
cuts the
access to
grass?
it. Well, my neighbor and I cut the grass.
The township doesn't cut the grass?
The township does not cut the
pay you
grass.
to cut the grass?
Yeah. We've been doing it. I've been there about 12 years, and we've just been trading off Sundays, just cutting the grass.
And you want to do how wide off?
About 10 feet off of the structure of my home into
So
my
you're gonna-
property, closest to that alley.
You're going to be attached 10 feet out
Yes.
sideways.
Correct.
And you're going to have 2 feet left?
Approximately 2 feet, correct.
Just looks awful tight. No more questions, thanks.
Mr. Raimondo?
So what was the thought as far as you want a shared crawl space? They're gonna pour a foundation and then connect, you have a basement or something? Like,
We have a basement.
is that
Yeah.
gonna be connected to the basement?
So it was my understanding that a crawl space is a requirement for an added structure. If it is not, then that's fine. But I was under the impression that it was, and we would have access to the crawl space through our basement. We have an existing window that the addition would connect to at the basement level that could act as the access to the crawl space for the addition.
Well, the crawl space would only be like, it wouldn't be,
It would be-
you wouldn't walk around.
No. It would just, it would be two or 3 feet high.
But did you look into going back where all the yard is? Like, did you ever think about going back with an addition?
Oh, to the back of the home?
Yeah.
Right, yeah, so the very last part of our house is a kitchen that when the home was built itself was an addition.
Got it.
So we're a little hesitant about building more onto that or on top of that.
Right, right.
Yeah.
And then, so the alley's all grass and you just kind of use it as a side yard?
Well, no one really uses, my neighbor's dog runs around there sometimes, but it is,
Nobody parks back there? and
there's no drive
They
access,
don't
yeah, it's
plow or
curved.
anything, or?
Nope.
No?
It's all grass.
Kind of like a yard then?
It's just kind of like a yard,
Yeah.
yeah. And then all those neighbors, for my property, then there's the alley. That's all fenced. There's my neighbor's garage, and it's all fenced in. So it looks fine. I mean, it's well maintained,
Yeah.
but just no one really uses it.
But there's a curb there too, right?
Yep.
Like, it looks like it used to be gravel or something, it just grew in?
Could have been.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And none of the neighbors there have a problem with it along that alley coming out towards your property line?
No, the very rear of my property, the neighbor closest to the alley there, had tried to absorb that portion of it and fence it in, and you can't do that.
Yeah.
So no, they're all fenced and they have their properties all lined up there. And the only person it would really affect is Bill Maydell, my immediate neighbor, and he's totally fine with it. Yeah.
They've been using it for.
Because he would still have his garage or his shed, and then that alleyway, and then starts my property line, and then a couple feet in would start the addition.
Thank you.
Because that was, a couple of things that I was going to ask about was why you just don't build it off the back, because then you don't need to be here.
Yeah.
The other one, I mean, this is such a strange thing with this alley. Because there's no curb cut,
No.
and yet there's a curb at your yard,
Mhm.
where your yard ends, and nobody uses this for anything really? Can you mow it?
Yeah, there was a big chain link fence when we bought the property that was just rusted out and failing. So we had that cut down. So that curb you're seeing was the block foundation for a chain link fence that the original owner had built himself. And it looks like he built it himself. So no one uses the alley for anything right now because no one owns it. Right, it's owned by the township.
I didn't walk down it to see where it terminated.
So it's an adverse possession.
Yeah, I mean,
Can't adversely possess public property.
yes, you can, the Gallo case.
See, there you go.
City of Philadelphia lost. So, anyway,
Sorry.
but that's off the record. But just, it's odd, it just goes back and
Mhm.
ends back there?
So it goes back, and it was a large tree, and then beyond that tree there was the arborvitae and all of his vines, and it was really, really hairy back there. So a few years ago, the tree was cut down,
And then that opened everything up, and then Bill and I would mow, and little by little we cleared the brush, and then eventually terminates into property owned by Jasper DeSanta, who owns the swath of land behind mine, which is just this like untamed forest. So that butts up against that. So yeah, it's this alleyway, it's all grass, and then it terminates into Jasper's property, and then there's a big hill. But it's just, we cut the grass so it looks nice, and that's it.
Is he building in front of it or behind?
What is your little, there's something on the
Is
side
that
of
your
your house?
air conditioner compressor on the side?
Or is
On the
it
side of
just
the
a
house we do,
Are
yeah.
you building between that and the street?
Correct, it would be, the addition would terminate before the AC compressor,
Okay.
right? So we wouldn't build, we wouldn't impede upon that. And then the front of the home, yeah. So it's about 15 and a half feet from the front of the property back to where we were planning on the addition.
I mean, I know it's not a large addition. My only real concern is what happens if the township ever decides to do something with this alley?
Yeah.
So, anyway, I have no.
Well,
I have no
they're going to have to
further
deal with,
questions.
the.
Do you have any questions, Mr. Sanders?
No, Mr. Chairman, thank you.
Any comments from the public? Seeing none, do we have a motion?
I'll make a motion.
Any opinion, council?
I'll make a motion, Mr. Chairman, to grant an application, or to grant variance from Plymouth Township zoning ordinance number 342, amendment Article 7, Section 702, C.1, in addition to the side of existing main structure, which will reduce the required side yard and cross feet to approximately 2 feet. So there will then remain approximately 11 feet of open space between the property line and 1508 Market and the closest neighbor. And that will be at the property located at 1508 Market Street in the C residential zoning district, to be conducted in substantial conformity with the exhibits and testimony offered at tonight's hearing.
Do we have a second?
I second.
So, Mr. Higgins?
In favor.
Mr. Daly?
In favor.
Mr. Crilly? Mr. Rolando?
In favor.
Chair votes in favor. Good luck. Interesting.
Thank you.
Next is Goldenberg Management Inc.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is the application of Goldenberg Management, Inc. For two variances. The first is from Section 3407A of the zoning ordinance to allow 4.1 parking spaces per 1,000 square feet of gross leasable area, where 4.5 spaces per 1,000 square feet of gross leasable area are required, and a variance from Section 3405A of the ordinance to allow 803,857 square feet of gross leasable area, where the maximum gross leasable area is 775,000 square feet. This property is located at 2000-4000 Chemical Road in Plymouth Meeting, PA, 19462, and is in the mixed-use, mixed-use planned development districts. Mr. Lewis is here on behalf of the applicant.
Good evening, everybody. Rob Lewis, Kaplan Stewart, representing the applicant, Goldenberg Management, Inc. Goldenberg Management, Inc. is the managing agent for the owner of the property. That's Metroplex West Associates, LP. I do have with me this evening a couple of John W's. I have John Williamson from the Goldenberg Group, and I have John Witchner from what was McMahon, now Bowman.
A Bowman company.
If the board will permit me, is there anybody that works here?
Well, I was just going to ask that, Mr. Lewis. Is there anybody here tonight who is interested either in favor of or against this application? Okay, seeing none, Mr. Lewis, you can proceed. You can offer this in colloquy, whatever they call that.
I'll do my best to
Offer of proof. There you go.
a bunch of the testimony. I do have Mr. Williamson, Mr. Whitman, certainly to answer any questions that you may have, but I'll try and summarize what I think their testimony would be and take it from there. So, and in doing that, I will identify the exhibits that I have handed to the board in some pre-marked exhibit packages. I believe those are identified as exhibits A1 through A7. First, just for purposes of the record, I will mark the application that brings us here this evening, so that's A1. And as I think you already heard from the announcement from your solicitor, we are seeking 2-dimensional variances this evening. The next exhibit in the packet is Exhibit A2. That's simply an aerial photograph of the property and the surrounding area. I think it's pretty safe to assume that every single person in Plymouth Township knows what the Metroplex is. I certainly hope they do. But anyone that hasn't been here since maybe at least the late 90s might not really understand a little bit of the history of the Metroplex. I will not go into all the details, but I think it's important for the record. What we know as the Metroplex Retail Center was actually a piece of a larger tract of land. It was originally more than 100 acres located between what was at that point the brand new Blue Route and Chemical Road. Plymouth Township endeavored to create a new ordinance back then to deal with the development of that entire 100-acre tract. That ordinance established what is now known as the Mixed-Use Plan Development District, and it called for the mixed-use development of that tract and really subdividing it into 2 different categories. One being the retail center we know now, that was supposed to be retail and entertainment and so forth. And then the other, which is adjacent and open, now owned by Brandywine, was more the corporate side. So you have office, hotel, and other uses proposed there. That ordinance set out all kinds of parameters, all kinds of regulations, one of which actually brings us here this evening. At the time, the anticipation was that a maximum development for the retail component would be 775,000 square feet of gross leasable area. We are here this evening seeking relief from that, and I'll get into that in a moment. Eventually, as we know, the Metroplex was built out. Today, the Metroplex, as you can see on the plan that's to my left, directly in front of the board, Metroplex actually only ended up constructing about 770,000 and change of that maximum permitted GLA. That GLA being anchored by the obvious tenants, Target, Lowe's, Giant, more recently, obviously, PGA Tour Superstore, which draws me there seemingly too often. But unlike many retail environments, particularly post-COVID, Metroplex has actually been incredibly successful. They have had people wanting to get into the Metroplex, and we did not have space to offer them. For years, quite frankly, we have looked at expansion opportunities at the Metroplex. We have even sat down with township staff and members of council. Mr. Higgins may have even been there when one of the plans were shared of concepts for pretty large expansion of that facility to include a number of restaurant pads and things like that. Today, that's not the current plan. That may be a future plan. But as we found out at the Planning Commission, if we do endeavor for that larger plan, there are going to be some significant improvements that need to be made. Not everybody loves the circulation pattern that exists at the Metroplex today, but it is what it is in terms of circulation. It's unique. There's a bus stop. There's a number of individual financially subdivided parcels in there to deal with. So that's a much larger project that we certainly hope to be back for in the future. But today, what we are proposing and is on our zoning plan, which is applicant's Exhibit A3, is a very modest expansion that really involves 2 components. One, immediately adjacent to Barnes & Noble, next to DSW, there's availability and space for an inline retail. It's just over 25,000 square feet. It's 25,225 square feet, I believe. And then on the opposite side of the main access off of Chemical Road, where Guitar Center is, and Ulta, and a number of other smaller shops, the proposal is for an 8,000 square foot pad. We do not have confirmed tenants for either space. As I was explaining to Mr. Daly before we started this evening, never want to get too far out in front and sign up a tenant and then not be able to deliver. So we did not want to presume zoning relief. Nobody should. So we don't have a firm tenant. We do have a number of people that are very interested in these spaces, so it will not take long to fill them. Right now, we have presumed a restaurant for the 8,000 square foot pad, more than anything because a restaurant is a more conservative analysis. It's a greater generator of parking demand and traffic. So when we do our analyses that I'm about to speak about, you have a higher number in there. If it ends up being a bank or another user, the numbers simply drop and there's less impact for that user. But so for conservative purposes, we have assumed that 8,000 square feet would be a restaurant. Both of those expansions, as you see in applicant's exhibit A3, would occur entirely on existing impervious surface. So this project, even though it will ultimately go through a land development or a waiver of land development process, we're not adding any impervious surface to the facility, and we will simply be removing some of the parking that exists today. We are not affecting general circulation or access either to the center. However, as I mentioned earlier, because the ordinance has that maximum of 775,000 square feet of GLA, our project with this proposed expansion would get us to 803,857 square feet. So we're requesting a variance from that criteria to permit that increase. The second aspect of the project is really addressing parking. As I noted, the expansion will occur in existing parking fields, so we will be reducing some of the more than 3,500 parking spaces that exist. It's actually, I think, the last count, 3,510. Anyone that has been to the Metroplex recently, I think, can attest that parking is plentiful at the Metroplex. Not everyone likes circulation to get to some of that parking, but it is certainly there. And you will not have difficulty finding parking in the Metroplex. And I think as our studies bear out, you don't even have difficulty finding parking proximate to where you want to be. We have other large users in the township that's not the case. You have a lot of parking on paper, but when you try and go to a particular restaurant, you can't get anywhere near it. That's not the case at the Metroplex. Knowing that, despite knowing that, Goldenberg hired McMahon, a Bowman company, to perform parking analyses of the center to make sure that facts bear out what we all thought was the case. I have marked as applicants exhibits A4 and A5, 2 parking analyses prepared by Mr. John Wichner. And the interesting thing about these analyses, the reason they are separated, is John performed a series of analyses throughout the center because we did not think it enough or sufficient to simply say how many parking spaces are there, 3,510, how many are available. Clearly there's enough. That's not enough of analysis when you're doing kind of backfill into an existing center. What John did instead was break the entire shopping center down into zones and then analyze each zone to make sure that, or to understand what's there today, and then to make sure that even with the expansion, that there would be adequate parking to serve the existing users and the proposed additional users in those areas. And that's exactly what those studies conclude. That study included analyses during weekday and weekend, midday and PM peak, as is standard practice in the industry. So all of that is in there, and it is very conclusive that there is an abundance of parking. To put a couple of numbers into the record and spare you reading through 25 or 26 pages on each analysis, Zone D was the area for the restaurant pad area over by Ulta and the Guitar Center. The analysis will show that that has about 67,400 square feet of gross leasable area that's served by 375 parking spaces. The highest demand of those parking spaces noted in that area was 116 vehicles, meaning that at the very peak of parking demand, there are more than 250 parking spaces available.
What was the number, Rob? The first number? The highest demand was
116.
116. Okay.
So the analysis then goes through, plugs in, or one subtracts out the parking spaces that we would lose, and then adds in the demand of that proposed restaurant. Again, just being conservative, saying a restaurant, it could be something else. And after that, the total demand is anticipated to still only be about 189 vehicles, meaning that more than 180 parking spaces would still be available in Zone D. The same really bore out when we looked at what is called Zone E. Those results being very similar. The zone contains 259,500 square feet of GLA. You've got Lowe's and some larger users over there. That area is served by 917 parking spaces. The peak demand in that location, Mr. Sander, was 265 vehicles, meaning that in Zone E, at the peak demand of parking, you still had 652 parking spaces available. So again, after considering construction and the anticipated demand, we still are anticipating an excess of more than 500 parking spaces available in that location. The last piece kind of the parking analysis you can see on your plans, hopefully some of your plans printed in color, because there are a couple areas in red, and I just wanted to point those out. It's important for the board to understand. Many times with a Lowe's or a Home Depot or any store like that, you start seeing a proliferation of contractor vehicles, guys with very large trucks or trucks with trailers, and it can be a mess at times if all you have are standard 10 by 20 parking spaces, things of that nature. So Lowe's and Goldenberg have worked together to try and facilitate better use of that parking area for those kinds of vehicles. And so what you see on the plan are some areas that are proposed to be restriped to provide better parking and better access for those types of vehicles. Much of that striping has already been implemented. There's nothing in the ordinance that prevents you from having those types of parking stalls or put them where we're proposing. In fact, they've been reviewed with the fire marshal and staff, and much of that's there. You'll also see some red on the side of the building. That is for some additional exterior storage. All of that's permitted. We're not seeking relief for that, but it affects the total parking count in the shopping center. So between this application and what we hope is a subsequent plan development, we want to memorialize those changes and make sure that our final parking count is accurate. At the end of the day, the shopping center will still have a parking ratio of 4.1 spaces per 1,000 of gross leasable area. But the ordinance here certainly has some older numbers and is requiring 4.5 parking spaces per 1,000. So we are requesting relief from that provision. I included as applicant's exhibit A6 a few aerial photographs, drone photos. Those were taken in conjunction with the parking studies, just showing the actual condition when those studies were completed. And applicant's exhibit A7 is the curriculum vitae of Mr. John Wichner. In case the board was not familiar with his credentials, I believe you probably are, but I include it nonetheless. So that is a summary of the application. I'm happy to have Mr. Williamson and or Mr. Wichner repeat any of that or simply adopt that as their testimony, and maybe if that's acceptable, I can ask them one or two follow-up questions before opening it up to the board.
It's fine.
Great. Can we have them both sworn?
State your name, please.
John Wichner, W-I-C-H-N-E-R. John Williamson.
With raise your right hand, please. Do you solemnly swear or affirm the testimony you're about to give in this matter is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Thank you.
I'll start with Mr. Williamson. John, am I correct that you are employed by the Goldenberg Group?
Yes,
And approximately how long have you been employed by the Goldenberg Group?
I've been with them on this project since 2000.
Okay. And before that, you were also in real estate and related activities?
Yes,
And you are familiar with the Metroplex Shopping Center?
intimately.
Mr. Williamson, I trust that you heard my long-winded opening this evening. And if you were called to testify to the facts that I testified with respect to the existing conditions of the center and Goldenberg's plans for the center, did I get those facts correct? Would you adopt those as your testimony?
I would.
Any changes, additions, or corrections?
Everything was spot on. I would elaborate that I'm personally the one who did walk. I've spoken to the township manager, and I did walk with regard to circulation and the restriping around Lowe's in that area with the fire marshal personally, and came to agreement on orientation and everything else.
John, at the Planning Commission, asked that if this proceeds to land development, that the applicant agree to take a look at the number of and the proximity of handicap parking spaces. And they asked that we look at the pedestrian striping to ensure that there are adequate pedestrian connections. Are those two conditions acceptable to the Goldenberg Group?
Yes, they are.
And John, if the board is inclined to grant our application this evening, any reason to believe that the granting of that relief would be detrimental to the public health, safety, or welfare?
No health, will, or safety issues that were brought up to my attention, and I don't believe there would be.
Mr. Witchner, I assume you are a professional engineer and licensed in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania?
Yes, I am.
And applicant's exhibit A7 is an accurate statement of your professional and educational background?
Yes, it is.
And you have prepared the exhibits that I've marked as applicant's exhibits A4 and A5, the traffic analyses?
Yes, that is correct.
And did you hear my summary of those analyses this evening?
Yes.
And though I am not a licensed engineer, was I accurate in my representation of the analysis that you performed and the conclusions that you reached?
Yes, and you eloquently boiled down several months of my work into 15 minutes.
And John, I assume then that if you were called to testify, you would testify to the facts and the conclusions as I presented them to the board this evening?
Yes, I would.
No additions, alterations, or corrections?
Correct.
Okay. And John, from your standpoint, from a professional engineering standpoint, any reason to believe that if the board were inclined to grant the relief you're seeking, that relief would have a detrimental impact on public health, safety, or welfare?
No, and that's based upon our field observations during the weekday midday peak hour, the weekday evening peak hour, the Saturday midday peak hour, the Saturday evening peak hour, as well as the Institute of Transportation Engineers parking demand statistics nationwide that we applied throughout the study.
Great, thank you. With that, certainly open it up to the board for any questions that you might have.
Before we forget, I need the two conditions that would be acceptable to the applicant repeated that Mr. Williamson testified to.
Yes, the Planning Commission asked that if and when we proceed to land development, that we review the number and location of handicap spaces. We don't have any belief that we don't have enough per code, but there was a concern that maybe at Giant there might be a need for a few more additional handicap spaces. But we'll just take a look at it globally and address it. And the second was from a...
In the entire Metroplex?
Correct,
Okay.
the entire Metroplex
Yeah.
Center, yes.
Center, right. Okay.
And then the second was, which they will have jurisdiction over, is to just look at pedestrian circulation, making sure that we have adequately striped connections for pedestrians in the vicinity of the two proposed expansions. We believe there are currently actually pedestrian connections across some of those access ways. They just want us to make sure, one, that they haven't faded, that they're still there, and my guess is they will ask us some more questions if and when we return during land development.
From my reading of their minutes, it sounded as though they were particularly concerned about being able to get from where the Ulta, where your proposed restaurant is, across and
To the
over to
bus
where the
station.
bus stop is. And having been there, including just this past Saturday, that's a pretty tough walk.
It's an interesting adventure to cross all of that sea of asphalt. So it may not be a simple direct route that we have to arrive to. Unfortunately, as we all know, no matter what you put out there, People are just going to go where they're going to go, but we're going to do our best at least to make it obvious where we think that that path should be, and we'll work with the Planning Commission on it during that land development process. We obviously can't blow up that entire intersection, unfortunately.
It's difficult when it's crowded with cars,
It
just
is.
driving a car through there. I'm not sure that there's good, and also from where DSW is, it's also difficult to get across there. Just getting across to where the bus stop is on the other side. Because if you notice, you see where it is.
It is if you, particularly if somebody's trying to make a direct, line from, say, Ulta to that bus stop, which, as I said, isn't always the intended path. But we're all, on some level, a little bit lazy, and we're trying to get where we're trying to go, and people may be trying to get to a bus. So again, the Planning Commission is certainly intent on having us discuss that with them and try and find some ways to ensure that people use a safer route than simply cutting straight across that large intersection.
I'm not sure that there's good signage either for the vehicles coming in to alert them to pedestrians crossing either. And that also contributes to the difficulty of trying to cross from where Ulta is or where DSW is. It's not the greatest crossing there either.
Agreed.
Just, so I think that that's something both visually on the pavement, but also signage, cars, hey, there might be somebody trying to cross here. I mean, the bus stop is over there.
Correct.
So that's just a concern I had when I was out there looking at it.
And I'm lucky, I am generally going left as I come in, trying to get over to that side of the center. But yes, anybody that's trying to make that immediate right, and I do it. My son is goes to the Guitar Center every so often. But yeah, it's something we intend to look at and see what we can do. Again, this is not, unfortunately, at this point, we're not looking at 6-7 pad sites where you could try and relook at the entire circulation of the entire shopping center. But that may be something that's further down the road at some point. So at this point, what we had committed to the Planning Commission was just trying to make sure that we take a look at that pedestrian circulation and try and make sure that if there are any new employees or existing employees, or even just people coming by bus that want to shop there, they can get back to the bus safely.
Trying to see one of
This question?
Hold on, I was going to have
Oh, you
you,
go ahead,
I
please.
was going to send it over to you in just 1 second. I was trying to see one other photo, one other Google. Yeah, that was the other problem. My memory is correct. Between DSW and where you might cross for the bus, there is no sidewalk there. So, Rob, if you look at the DSW on the big plan you have.
Yep.
If you come out of DSW, I mean, it's daunting for a pedestrian because there is no sidewalk taking you up to the main road. Because I saw somebody the other day walking across that, and it was a really tough thing for a pedestrian to navigate. And they were trying to navigate on Saturday afternoon in December.
Okay. We'll
So,
take a look at it.
It was, if you look, you
yeah,
can
you
see
can see
there
where it
is no
ends.
sidewalk there.
Yep, you can see it ends right at the end of the building, right by the loading there.
So to
Right
try and get
DSW.
from either DSW or Barnes and Noble across to where the bus stop is tough. And there is no, from what I can tell, no marking on the pavement there either saying, hey, pedestrian cross here.
Yep.
Either way. I mean, there's one over here, but it's nothing to get you there.
Yeah, it appears that you could have somebody cross over the minor drive access and then hit the pedestrian facilities on the far side, which would connect to a sidewalk. But you're right, it does appear there's a missing segment there of sidewalk.
There's some missing sidewalk and a missing pedestrian walkway from the side where DSW is to where the pedestrian walkway is to get across. Yeah, there's no way to guide you to get there.
Yep.
So it is something to look at. So
Happy to do so.
with that, I'd like to turn it over to the Higgin. Mr. Higgin, no question. Mr. Daly.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Is the proposal for the restaurant, I was going to ask, this is a question I thought of the other day, but your answer partially addressed it. Is the restaurant driven by shoppers, maybe it's just that almost sort of a placebo, like something that, it could, you were saying it could be a bank, it could be something else?
John can elaborate if need be, but they've had a lot of interest in a number of restaurants in this location. It's ripe for it. In fact, as I mentioned several years ago, we were considering trying to do multiple pad restaurants here. But we simply didn't want the occasion to arise that it ended up not being a restaurant and somebody said, you came in and told us you were getting a restaurant. Right now, that's certainly the hope, but it could end up being a bank or another user in that pad. The good news is the restaurant has the highest demand for parking and so forth, so our analysis would be conservative, even if it ends up being another user, but
I know there was a reference potentially to a fast food restaurant, but I saw another one.
there's no drive-through. I don't think, I mean, you're not gonna really accommodate some of those high drive-through users. It's more of a, particularly the size, 8,000 square feet, that's a large restaurant. That's a fast casual or sit-down restaurant. That is not a drive-through pad. Drive-through pads are 2,500 square feet.
So it could be something more than lobster there.
Hopefully.
Yeah, are there any proposed, any specific proposed tenants for the new retail space?
Not that we can disclose yet. We are anticipating that right now, I believe that that's a single tenant.
And could you go a little bit more, what were the reasons for the time windows that were selected for the parking evaluation?
John?
Sure, I can get into that. So in the engineering industry, we take a look at what some of the peaks are, especially for a retail type use. We're not going to study the AM because, you know, a lot of retail is either not open or it's less demanded. So we take a look at the midday, 11 a.m. to 1 p.m. We take a look at the evening, we've got, correct. So if I could have the actual times here. So midday is 11 a.m. to 2 p.m. The evening is 4 p.m. to 7 p.m. And then on the weekend, so Saturday, thinking that was going to be the highest, 11 a.m. to 2 p.m. in the afternoon, and then in the evening, 4 p.m. to 7 p.m. I've been taking a look at parking observations at the center really as far back as 2015. And we've seen throughout historical counts that those were the time periods that we've seen the highest demand at that center.
Yeah, I read your stuff, it was very good. One other question is, how will the addition of retail space between DSW and Barnes & Noble affect the overall number of parking spaces? How many will be eliminated? Because I know that's the parking area.
Correct. So in that zone E, we are looking at about 86 parking spaces being used for the construction of that retail center. So it's some of the numbers that Rob had given, and specifically really table 3 of my study for zone E, to take a look at the existing number of parking spaces and then reduce it because of that construction. We're still left with over 428 available parking spaces even after construction, but then adding in the demand for that retail space.
I noticed the New York area was heavily populated at around 4 o'clock on Friday afternoon. Okay, thanks. Just one other thing, and Mr. Chairman, this is almost a general question, I guess. There was an issue that came up about traffic circulation. Is that, you know, we didn't address that in terms of conditions. Is that, I know that was a concern of the planning committee. Is that something that would be a factor in any grant variance?
I mean, obviously, if the traffic circulation causes public safety, then yes, it would be a legitimate concern when you're looking at whether a variance should be granted.
Okay.
You know, they can't create something that creates a traffic hazard. Let's put it this way: we shouldn't grant them approval for something that creates a traffic hazard. I mean, it would be not in the public interest.
Right.
So that would be a good reason to deny something if that were to be the case.
It was something that you would probably be willing to consider.
Yeah, we've already committed to the planning commission that we will take a look at the pedestrian circulation piece of it. I think what we have stated on the record and what John had affirmed is that when you're talking about roughly a 4% increase in total GLA here, you're not really doing anything different than what's out there today. This will be a near negligible change in terms of vehicular traffic, even pedestrian traffic, and you can see that from the parking numbers. The circulation at the Metroplex has always been something for people to comment on more than anything else. Almost everybody thinks, oh, I'm coming in off of Chemical Road. Well, actually, it's a dual signalized access. There's a lot of access that comes in off of Gallagher as well.
Right.
It's a completely different circulation pattern. The Metroplex is a complex place from a traffic circulation standpoint. We might not design it exactly as it is designed today if we started over. And that opportunity to revisit some of that may present itself in the future with a larger project. But quite honestly, if as we explained to the Planning Commission, we're not going to blow up that whole intersection over two small retail tenants. Maybe in the future we have that opportunity to take a look at it. But there's a lot to consider here when you look at the rights that SEPTA has, the need to have that bus station at a centralized location, and then all of those varying traffic circulation patterns. So I think what we compromised with and made the Planning Commission happy with was agreeing to look at the pedestrian side of it, because that typically is some minor sidewalk additions and some striping, and they seem very content that given the magnitude of this project, or lack of magnitude, that the pedestrian was the thing to look at.
Thank you. Mr. Freeland. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Couple questions, Rob. You talk really fast, so
I'm sorry. I heard kickoff was, soon, so I was trying to do my best for you.
I don't disagree. We could table this till next month.
No, this is great.
So, between Barnes Noble and DSW, is this building going to be the entire, is it going to connect to both buildings?
If I may, can I address that? The building will be separated. The one-line drawings were presented to the fire marshal. There's adequate spacing between the building and DSW, and the walk area does not encroach upon the side entry gas. And the loading would be over on the Barnes & Noble side. So they're not connected in any fashion. They will be in line aesthetically from the front, so that sidewalks going across them will facilitate pedestrian movement.
Mr. Prelay, you can see on the plan a little hatched area between Barnes & Noble and the yellow box. Applicant's Exhibit A3, it's the best way to see it. Because Barnes & Noble actually has, not only does it have some glass on that side, it actually has an access door towards the rear. So there will continue to be some space between those two buildings.
Appears that it's connected to DSW.
It is not.
Plans look like it.
So it'll be a standalone building, and there'll be access on each side?
If you'll notice the slashed gray line there between DSW and the yellow box,
No,
that is,
No.
There's only slash here, John, between
that's-
Barnes & Noble, not DSW.
no, it's about 12 feet. It may not show that on the line the way it was drawn.
Certainly doesn't show it in the plans.
On both sides of the new building, it'll be 12 feet.
There will be open space on both sides, and the DSW piece, yes, there is, I'm sorry, I
So it's not
had to look over his shoulder. I'm not-
DSW
It is
side
what it
is-
isn't 12 feet on both sides.
No, there will be more between Barnes & Noble, that's the loading side, and Barnes & Noble will maintain theirs. The DSW side, there is a door out on the side, there's a gas connection, and there will be a walkway through there, so.
So
Fire
DSW
Marshal and I
doesn't
would
use
be-
their side for loading, but Barnes & Noble does.
Correct.
Is that what you're talking about?
And if it's drawn that way, I apologize, I didn't look there.
Okay. And then, so you're gonna stick a building in there, right, retail? You're not allowed to disclose who it is, but I would assume is it gonna be similar to a Barnes & Noble or a DSW, like that type of retail?
Dry goods retail, consistent with the rest of the center at this time.
Is the parking requirement for the proposed retail that you have lined up to go in there, what's their need?
So the ordinance, the way the ordinance is structured, it actually gives you one ratio for the entirety of the
All
center
retail.
because it assumed a mix of retail, it assumed actually a percentage that would be restaurant. And so that's why you have a slightly inflated overall ratio at 4.5. Many ordinances are going to have 4 or less, even in a mixed scenario.
So our ratio is inflated?
It's a very high ratio in that area, particularly in modern, when you're looking at current parking. I mean, look at the demand that you're seeing from the study. In this day and age, with so much online shopping particularly, so many less people are actually going to a center. This is a dry goods retailer, so we simply look at the 25,225 square feet. John would apply the ratio applicable to that from ITE to generate a new demand of that 25,000 square feet and add it back into the existing demand to get a total demand, and then evaluate whether or not enough parking is available.
Correct, and just from a sense of what the Institute of Transportation Engineers looks for this type of retail center, all of their national studies suggest about 2.9 spaces per 1,000 square feet in the highest peak hour. And whereas the ordinance currently calls for 4.5, looking for a variance down to 4.1, there still is that 1.2 spaces per 1,000 square feet delta between the demand and the supply, which is
Is that somewhere in this write-up? You just said?
in the Zone E, in attachment 5.
Zone E is A5.
Yeah.
I'm in Zone E.
Okay, great. Practically the third to last page, I'd say, there's a chart that looks like this, if I may. It is, you stay there. Perfect. Okay, so in attachment 5, there is a table pulled right from the Institute of Transportation Engineers Parking Generation Manual called Shopping Center, Land Use Code 820. And this sheet that you are on right now is the peak parking demand per 1,000 square feet on a Saturday, and the rate is 2.91, which is the average rate that they've seen during the peak of all the sites, about 58 sites around the country existing sites around the country that they've studied. That's where the 2.91 comes into play, versus a lot of the ordinances, certainly around here, which talk about 4.0, 4.5 spaces per 1,000. So.
Well, and you did a study, right? You went out there and counted cars?
That's correct. That's correct.
So what did you come up with? What was your average?
So also in this report, the existing peak parking demand, which occurred on Saturday midday in Zone E, on page 2 of Exhibit A5, Table 1, the far right column is titled the resultant parking demand ratio of 1.02.
So you come up with 1.02 and the average rate is 2.91.
That's correct.
Okay, and that was on a Saturday afternoon.
That's correct. I will say a lot of the data that's contained in the parking generation manual was pre-COVID. I think we all know a lot what's going on with the retail tenants. They have changed, yes. So we've done studies, again, as far back as 2015, and this number was higher than 1.02. Here we are 7 years later or so, knowing what retail is kind of going through, we're seeing a lower number than even what the national statistics were when they took their data pre-COVID as well.
Okay, so on Zone E, will there be a walkway between the 3 stores?
The intention is across the fronts.
Right, well, I'm sorry.
Correct, except where the gaps are between them. You would have your curb cut and go down.
Because cars are going, well, at least on the Barnes and Noble side, you can get the paper up there.
Correct.
Right?
Yes.
And then a question on page 3 of 5 of your October 16th report. Proposed conditions, holiday peak parking. Why would we use September for holiday peak parking? Why wouldn't we use December?
So we use, if you remember, I've been doing studies here as far back as 2015. What I was looking at, and this is page 3 of 5 through 4 of 5, where I have a correlation. So on page 3, in September of 2015, we saw a maximum parking demand of 351 spaces. A couple months ago, same month, just 8 years later, saw a peak parking demand of 265 spaces. So we took a look, so it's going down. As we kind of keep on going through the years, it's going down. What we then took a look at the top of page 4, what did September of 2015 versus Black Friday of 2015 take a look at? And there was certainly an increase, between September of 2015 and Black Friday of 2015. We then took that seasonal adjustment factor and applied it to our counts this year.
That's the 220%, right? 220%.
That's correct.
Okay.
That's correct, which leads to table 6. So in table 6, we applied that same adjustment factor into September 2023 counts, and we determined excess capacity if we accounted for Black Friday, like it was operating back in 2015. We see an excess parking capacity of 110 spaces in table 6. It's in green, highlighted in green.
Right, the 110.
Correct, but if you keep moving down to the column on the right, it leads to a resultant parking demand ratio of 2.53.
Okay. So you're taking September of 15 and November of 15. And I guess I'll ask, why wouldn't you use December? Is Black Friday a higher parking demand than the third week of December?
It really depends upon different uses. If you were talking about a giant, then maybe getting ready for the holidays, a meal, things like that, then maybe that may be higher.
Well, we're talking about Barnes & Noble and DSW and your proposed retail.
Right, and I will say back in 2015, Black Friday, I think, and some of the numbers that I've seen, is different than Black Friday today. We don't see as many people lining up at 4 a.m. for that $99 flat screen TV and things like that.
Right.
So, and we did counts back in 2015 as well in December, and we saw that Black Friday tended to be back then that hard date of the peak that we've seen.
So the reason why you don't use December is because you believe Black Friday is more demand.
That's correct.
Okay. And then how come we don't use 2019 right before COVID? Why do we use 2015, which was theoretically we're coming out of a recession, a meltdown, and 2019 we were humming along. The economy was really hot.
I only have counts from we were physically on the ground in 2015 when we were looking at some of the other pad sites that Rob had mentioned about different restaurant uses during that effort. That was happening in 2015. Then when the center changed, Goldenberg Group came back to the township just recently to talk about these retail uses. So I did not do a study in 2019.
So we don't have 2019 data. That's basically the answer.
That's correct. That's correct.
Is there any way to estimate the data based on increase in sales revenues and stuff like that for retailers in the shopping center?
John, is that really what ITE is supposed to, that gap that ITE is supposed to help fill in terms of having data, the ITE data, since you don't have the ability to obviously go back?
And I just want to make sure we're using, good data.
Sure. And I think that with, and again, we can go back to 2015, and we can talk about coming out of the recession versus things humming along. I think retail is just a lot different than it was in 2019, than it was in 2015, things like that. And that's why we had applied that seasonal adjustment factor, which I think is, again, a conservative analysis. But I think retail landscape has certainly changed, and we're starting to see that with the new data that ITE is talking about, which that 2.91 is going down, and a lot of those other numbers are going down because retail is certainly different. I have to admit, in 2015, I believe I shopped at Metroplex on Black Friday. In 2023, I did not. I'm sorry, John.
Best Buys, you used to have to wait outside,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
Probably
yeah.
not this year, I don't know.
Target was the same way back then.
Okay. The only other question I had on that part was, and I lost my train of thought there. But let's just go to the other code. If need be, and I guess that's really you. I'm sorry, I forgot names.
John.
John, thanks, John.
John W. and John W. You can't go wrong.
So, John, we've been here where certain centers have provisions for excess parking if it's needed, like they could build more parking spots. Is there anywhere on this ground that for some reason in 10 years, you know, retail explodes again and you're jammed up with parking, even though our 4.5 sounds very high, maybe it isn't high in 10 years, who knows, I don't know. Is there any expanded parking if needed?
Surface-wise, there is not.
Thank you for that. So the restaurant, I think we heard there's no drive-through. It's just going to be a walk-in restaurant? If it's a restaurant?
There is the potential to have a drive-through. There is a lane that is depicted there, but we're not sure yet because we don't know the tenant, but it is certainly available.
So I guess I missed that.
I may overreach, but I did walk that with the fire marshal. And it is positioned in such a way that if a drive-through lane was needed, it can be facilitated in the way it's laid out there. I'm not saying it's for drive-through, but we're anticipating. It would be nice if my crystal ball worked long enough to where I knew what I was gonna put there. And we didn't, so we tried to anticipate all the conditions that we might need to face.
Drive-through for pickup.
Well, based on your crystal ball, you have a list of prospects, right? How many prospects not drive-throughs?
Almost everybody these days. I mean, it can be drive up, it can be pick up. I mean, Chipotle does drive-through, almost everybody.
So
it's
there's
fast food.
really a good probability you're gonna have to drive through the restaurant.
It is certainly possible. That may be a pickup window, it may be traditional drive-through, but we certainly have to accommodate it. And same with if it ends up being a bank, we have to obviously have the ability to do that. So we wanted to make sure to lay it out in a way.
So which
That's
exhibit shows the drive?
A3. You can see on exhibit A3
I say.
that there's a drive-through lane between the proposed pad and that outer curb. A3 should be the plan that's in front of us.
That might be too small, Dave. Can we say it? Yeah, right in front there.
It's there. It's right there.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's there. So I guess what are you willing to agree to? No drive-through, no fast food.
I don't think that we're willing to accept a restriction on what can be there. They're all permitted uses.
Okay, I think you stated at the planning commission that it would not be fast food, Rob.
We may have to, no. I don't
That's
think that we
minutes.
did.
Will not be
That's what
fast
minutes
food,
say.
will
Well, I
not
don't
be a
get to see
fast
the
food
minutes to tell you
restaurant.
whether or not it's accurate, but we don't believe that it's fast food, but
I do have a concern
It's a
back to
permitted use.
my original point. If you're gonna try and have pedestrian circulation, you're gonna have a drive-through. And I see the disaster we have with the Dunkin' Donuts on Germantown Pike. I mean,
There's no tenant as of now.
So, you got a big conflict with the people trying to walk across wherever they're gonna walk across in the drive-through. If you're having a pedestrian walk from this side of the center over to the bus stop, and the drive-through entrance is gonna be right there.
certainly, and Mr. Mandione, I don't disagree, but I would submit to you that that is something that we will have to go through in the township's ordinances within land development to make sure that we can provide that. Our only requests for relief tonight have to do with the availability of parking, and whether or not we can provide adequate parking under your ordinance. This is, as you know, only one step in that process. We need relief for parking before we can even head to land development. During that land development, Lonnie Manai, Tim Woodrow are going to analyze whatever our final tenant layout is to make sure that we meet all the codes with respect to stacking if it has drive-through, and certainly circulation and the ability to cross. That's why when we talked with the Planning Commission about pedestrian circulation, we couldn't say, yes, we'll just put a crosswalk in this spot, because we don't have the exact final layout yet. Again, the relief has to do with parking, which there is abundance of parking.
And the expansion of the gross leasable area.
Understood.
Yes.
It also has to deal with that, so. I mean, I think the board is looking at the overall health, safety, and welfare concerns of putting a restaurant up there and circulation issues that exist now versus what they might be. I think it's relevant.
I don't disagree that it is relevant, 100%. I'm just saying that it also is something that is going to have to go through an entire review process.
Oh,
where we have full land
granted.
development plans and where we will have a final tenant layout on that path.
Do you have more questions, Mr. Aprile?
Is there a zone D in this traffic or this parking analysis?
Yes.
That should be exhibit A4.
A4 is D, A5 is E.
Oh, there's two different ones, okay. So you lose 64 spots, less spots, and you're cutting out, I mean, why do you cut out the extra row? Versus there's two rows close to the building, you cut out one of them, right? And your, do you have the illustration of, it's this thing, right? The illustration of the parking change for the restaurant pad.
Yes, it's also on A3.
Where's that?
That's A3 in your book. There you go.
So, right, so you're pushing it up against the corner, it's gonna back up to the left, basically?
Correct.
From a traffic standpoint, is there going to be an inlet to go in there, or do you have to go all the way around to come in?
No, the general circulation will remain the same. The last thing we wanted to do was create an additional access point on that main access drive.
Okay. And then you take out, is that because it's 8,000 square foot, it's got to jet out to the first row of parking? The
Yeah.
first long row of parking?
Yeah, at this point, I mean, that, to try and fit an 8,000 square foot box that would accommodate potential users, that was the best fit in terms of fitting that
So I
puzzle
guess
piece
my
in there.
question is that parking right up to the door, like in front of the curb, to go into the restaurant or the store, whatever it's going to be?
I believe that Plymouth Township has a requirement of separation between the edge of parking and the front of the building. Usually there's a requirement for a 5-foot sidewalk. There may be parking stops, there may be bollards, other things certainly to prevent vehicles from encroaching on that sidewalk. But
That's all
again,
figured in here, right? Even though you can't see it.
correct.
It's figured into the parking numbers. You know, when Goldberg, when the applicant comes in for land development, they have to take a look at the rest of the ordinance and take a look at the setbacks between parking, the 5-foot sidewalk in front of the store, you need some landscaping there, things of that nature. Exhibit A3, I took that as to be illustrative of an 8,000 square foot box that then I ran the numbers for how many spaces do you lose, how many spaces is that 8,000 square foot box demand. But obviously, as we go through land development, all those other ordinances, would need to be satisfied.
So do we know that the 8,000 square foot box fits?
Yes.
Okay. With all the other land development requirements? Now, you didn't get there yet, right?
We are confident that it will fit, and if it doesn't, it's on us to have to then
Well,
reduce it to make sure it
Because it's
does.
not, I can't see it, I was just curious.
As that was portrayed on there, and I apologize if the drawing, I'm at the back of
Don't
those. So
apologize, that's fine.
when I walked with Mike Melicheski, the fire marshal, we did discuss this, where it would sit, its proximity, its access, and he felt very comfortable with, and I point that out from the circulation, from a safety and public standpoint of fighting the fire and dealing with the area as it's positioned, and he was comfortable with that. The specific fine polishing and details would be done at the time of the building layout and going in for building permits.
Okay, thanks, John.
You're welcome.
No more questions.
Just a quick follow-up on that. So if the numbers and the parking change, you have to come back to get another variance or
Absolutely.
relief for the lower amount of parking at the newer, bigger buildings?
If we reduced parking beyond what we have requested this evening, we absolutely would have to come back to you. That's why we tend to be on the conservative side, show an 8,000 square foot box in case maybe it's 7,775 square feet. It's a little bit more conservative to make sure that we have an 8,000 square foot box that fits there and can still accommodate the number of spaces that.
Worst case scenario, if it doesn't, you'd have to come back and read.
Correct.
Correct.
The other thing is do you, I see all midday pictures. Is there any evening photos?
Yes.
Which ones are evening? I didn't see any evening. I saw a lot of middays.
John, I may have to recreate all of
Okay, so
them after we.
right, so on Zone E, Thursday afternoon, that was between 4 and 7 p.m. And then I think.
And I don't disagree that there's excessive parking, but just, if you started out this evening saying retail and the Metroplex doing well and high demand, if I saw these photos of these empty parking lots, I wouldn't want to have a store here.
Yet it's better than anywhere else.
Well, I know, I'm just saying though, like, you know what I mean? I know what point you're trying to make that there's excess parking, but it looks like a ghost town from a lot of these pictures.
The interesting
Saturday.
thing, Mr. Raimondo, the interesting thing is, I think that's partially losing the forest among the trees, or losing the trees among the forest here, because there are just so many darn parking spaces out there.
I mean, I just-
In those pictures, you have hundreds of cars
I
out
do
there.
go there
It just doesn't
often,
look
and
like
it's been a lot more crowded than this.
That's good.
That's all I'm saying. But whenever you took these pictures, I mean, I'm not saying they're not accurate. I'm saying my personal experience is it's a little busier than this.
And that's what John can elaborate if you need, but when John does his study, he doesn't take one single snapshot like a picture does. He must study in increments and intervals over those couple of hours, so that you're not able to just cherry pick one single instance of how many cars are out there. So his people are counting cars. John, tell me, how often are they counting cars?
Correct, every 15-minute intervals between 11 a.m. and 2 p.m. and then
Well, you
4 p.m.
should do Lowe's on Memorial Day weekend when everybody's getting flowers, because I had a park all the way over here. No, other than that, no, I have nothing else.
You want to know the day you should have found it, if you want to see? The set getting ready to buy food for the Eagles Super Bowl.
Yeah, that's true. I shot during the game.
How'd it go?
Delivery or not, that was a busy day.
So I was out there Saturday, and I do agree with the basic premise that there is an abundance of parking spaces. I mean, especially when you're on the side with the Lowe's, Best Buy, DSW, and Barnes & Noble. And Barnes & Noble gets a decent crowd. It's kind of odd. There's people in DSW, but there's never a ton of cars there. So that side, I think, is fine. The more problematic side I have is the other side where you want to put this restaurant, because it was crowded Saturday. And I could see an 8,000 square foot restaurant on this past Saturday not having enough spaces. And you could be walking across. There were spaces on, where the Ross is. If you come out by where the bus stop is, oh yeah, there's spaces there. But it was crowded with Gap was, and Men's Warehouse, and Ulta, and Hallmark. And I could see an 8,000 square foot restaurant on that Saturday being a problem.
One of the things that we did in our study is that we had taken a look at each of these uses and whether it's Zone E for the 25,000 square foot building or Zone D for the 8,000 square foot building. We had assumed that patron would not be shopping at any other use in that shopping center. So they're there for that building and then they're out. What we are seeing though in the typical operations and ebbs and flow of a shopping center is that someone may park and go to 2 or maybe 3 different establishments within that area. So that's why our analysis is conservative by only it was as if this is a standalone building in that zone, but I think we all know that, you know, when you go into a shopping center, there may be an instance where you're going to 2 different stores or 3 different establishments for the course of that afternoon or that evening. That's what makes me feel comfortable with the numbers that we've observed and then added on top from Institute of Transportation Engineers.
And I appreciate that, but I'm looking at what was a very crowded area in your Zone D, and then looking at other areas. When you look at the area far away from Target or behind the bus stop, there's nobody parked there. And I don't know how you came up with putting an 8,000 square foot restaurant over there where, at least this past Saturday, it was quite crowded. And, yeah, these other areas, like this, the whole area, Target, sort of no man's land, there's nobody there. But you're putting your restaurant, you want to put your restaurant over on the other side. And it just, having been there on Saturday and seeing the crowd that was there at the Ulta and everything else, I mean, it was tight. It was the only part of the center that was tight. I mean, everywhere else you could park. Target had a lot of people, but there's no problem parking. Yeah, if you put your 8,000 square foot restaurant over on the other side, I don't see it interfering with anything. But the way that it was Saturday with that, where the restaurant was, and it's anecdotal, it was one day, I understand that. But that's my concern. I don't have any issue with the other store, because there's plenty of parking there.
Mr.
And it was crowded, but there was plenty of parking. There was not plenty of parking over by Ulta on Saturday afternoon. It just wasn't.
I can't speak to your instance on Saturday. I mean, there is a fitness user over there. Maybe they happen to have a busy day that morning at their fitness user. But I can speak to certainly, obviously, the study that has been done and showing repeatedly what the parking is out there. We also don't have the ability simply to place that restaurant pad necessarily right in front of Target. Target has rights, Target has certain restrictions. We have certain limitations, but what we did, what Goldenberg has done for years, is trying to analyze the best places to put these potential pad sites from a circulation standpoint and from a parking standpoint. And although you obviously had one experience that led you to believe that not as much parking over there as you felt was necessary, that's why we performed the study, to make sure that it can be accommodated. We have to keep our tenants happy too.
I appreciate all that. All I know is that, like I said, the basic premise of there's plenty of parking when you look at the center, and there's always empty spots. Sure. Yeah, this is not the King of Prussia Mall where, you know, they're bussing people around because they want parking on the Saturday before Christmas. You can park. I mean, you know, like you said, you might have had to park over closer to Barnes and Noble to go to Lowe's on Memorial, but you could still park. It wasn't an issue. I just have some concern about that 8,000 square foot restaurant over there from what I saw on Saturday afternoon. And the way that the pedestrian circulation is, if you're on the other side where there is lots of parking, because there is, like, you know, if you're over here, there's plenty of parking over here. But you're gonna have to cross that street to get to the restaurant then. And I don't doubt that there's an abundance of parking. It's just, I'm looking at it saying, is that?
And I think that was the fail-safe that the planning commission asked us to take a look at during land development, which is, and we talked a lot about pedestrian signage and striping, but to your point a while ago, there's a little bit of analysis for vehicle signage as well. I mean, and that's kind of all part of, you know, pedestrians and vehicles kind of have to coexist together, and I think that is part of that, you know, that commitment that Goldenberg Group and Allegan have made to the planning commission earlier this month.
And I understand there's all kinds of various land rights and different people own different parts of the center and everything. But when I looked over here and saw, like, there's nobody parked there. There's lots of people parked there. There's nobody parked over here. I mean, because you're pretty far from Ross or PGA or the State Store, and you're not walking from here over to DSW because you can park in front of DSW. I'm sitting there saying, you know, that looked like a better space because there's nobody using it. Right? You got the land not being used at all for anything. It may not be feasible, but I'm just saying, when I was there, that's what I saw.
No,
I mean, even over here where they have the lobster truck, there's nobody parked over here. You know, so I'm saying you have these unutilized spaces, and over here it's more utilized. Over here, there's nobody using it.
And again, we have looked at a number of different sites for potentially adding additional, but many of those, like the areas you're looking at, are going to require a complete redo of circulation through that area. You can't simply drop a pad right there without really addressing vehicular circulation. You couldn't get to that kind of a restaurant pad. You might have the physical space, whereas where it is shown now, we have the ability to utilize existing traffic patterns to control the traffic. And we do believe that the study bears out that there's not just parking, there's an abundance of parking.
Like I said to you, I agree, as a center, there's an abundance of parking. I mean, yeah, sit over here and sleep on parking space, nobody's gonna run you over because they're not using it. It just struck me when I was there Saturday that might be a little tight.
I wish I was there on Saturday because that's not the experience that I have had in my trips there, which are pretty frequent.
Saturday in December before Christmas, nice day, you know.
Yeah.
So,
They should have been out on the golf course.
If I could make one comment, if it was a fast food restaurant, people aren't parking for long periods of time. It's a fluid.
There's a lot of turnover
It's a
there.
fluid. I mean, I think it would be a home run, but I mean, hopefully we keep it moving so we don't stack and parking up.
Sure.
I mean, that would be a optimally thing. That's all.
I will say even Cracker Barrel, when it looks crowded, there's always even spaces over there whenever I've driven by, I go there. I see lots of spaces there, so. That was just my comment, there's some concern about the parking on that side, because it's a tighter, smaller area, and it is somewhat segregated off from the rest of the center.
It's a separate zone.
Yeah, it's a separate zone. You guys call it a separate zone, I look at it as a separate zone too. And just have some concern about that. So, and I understand your study, I'm not doubting that. And I also agree that most of the time, it's not an issue. Agreed. So, do you have any comments?
I have nothing.
Anybody from the public have any comments? So you want to come up and be sworn in? And
Paul Tornado, 1630 Sandy Hill Road.
Raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear or affirm the testimony about to give in this matter, the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Thank you.
So I think Metroplex is, one of the crown retail jewels of Plymouth Township. And from a tax rateable standpoint, it's 5 stars. You're right with there needs to be some discussion and work out of pedestrian access. But from a co-tenancy standpoint, a center is stronger with more stores. And this is, I'm in favor of what they're doing, provided that the restaurant, and especially the pedestrian, gets worked through. We used to call it back in the day a warehouse stores. Then they called it big box. But, you've got Raymore and Flanagan, which has 40-some thousand feet to put up living room displays and kitchen displays and so forth. And there's a dozen people in there. So it is always, and even the Lowe's, that contractors are in and out before the public, a lot of those stores even open up. But yeah, in favor, 100%.
thank you for the comment, and I do generally agree. It'd be nice to have another, I guess, Cracker Barrel's technically part of the group, but it'd be nice to have another restaurant there.
Yes.
I mean, I do agree, because you go there and there's nowhere to eat. So, anyway, thank you.
It would help our Proving Grounds project, Sport Field project. Those teams are always looking for local restaurants to eat at.
Thank you. Any other comments? Any further from the board?
Yeah, we're good. Well, I'll frame a motion for the board if you wish.
We can have a motion because we have no further comment.
Okay, if the board's of a mind, it would be a motion to grant variances to the Goldenberg Management, Inc., as stated in the application, conditioned on the applicant reviewing the number and location of handicap spaces in the Metroplex, conditioned on the applicant examining the pedestrian circulation and providing adequate striping in areas of the proposed expansion. And finally, the applicant obtaining final unappealable land development approval, and also, of course, the usual two conditions that we place on these types of things. That would be construction and use in substantial compliance with the testimony and evidence presented to the zoning hearing board this evening, and obtaining all required permits and approvals for the proposed expansions.
Mr. Stander, I don't usually get to comment on a motion, but I think if we're going to capture some of Mr. Mattione's comment, striping and signage, I think we're talked about, so might as well add in signage to that,
Okay, we'll add
just so we
in,
capture.
provide adequate striping and signage in areas of the proposed expansion. Okay.
Mr. Rosando, I had something in that.
Yes, sir.
In that vein, appropriate provisions for vehicular direction as necessary. I guess that would tie into signage.
Oh, yeah, okay. Well, do you want to just leave it at adequate striping and signage? Or do you want to add a separate condition that says the applicant shall examine appropriate signage throughout the areas of the proposed expansion?
That sounds appropriate, I think.
Okay, so we'll add a separate, another condition requiring the applicant to examine the appropriate signage in the areas of the proposed expansion.
Just out of curiosity, when you do go to land development and you see something that might not be safe, or an obvious pedestrian, is that something that gets addressed at that point?
Absolutely, yes. Your engineer will not let us get away with that.
All right.
That's true.
Do we have a second on the motion?
I'll second the motion.
I thought you made the motion.
Oh, okay, well, I guess.
That violates Robert's Rules of Order.
Okay. I so move and move for seconds.
Second. Thank you. Let's have a vote. Mr. Higgins in favor. Mr. Daly.
In favor.
Mr. Preloy.
In favor.
Mr. Armando. In favor. The chair votes in favor, and I do think it's a good center and tremendous for the township.
What restaurants?
Thank you.
We know, we'll let you know.